Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar titled You Say You Are My Ally, but then you UX Me. My name is Anwar Hijaz, and I'm a political science faculty member at Saddleback College, and I'm also a faculty mentor for CVC at One. I'm so pleased to introduce our facilitator for today's webinar, Sasha Stoikado. I'm sorry, I hope I pronounced that correctly, who is an online multimedia specialist at Los Angeles Community College District. Sasha doesn't just work in accessibility, she lives it. As an institutional designer and passionate accessibility advocate, she treats inclusion as a practice, not as a checkbox. At Los Angeles Community College District, she helps faculty and staff get into accessibility shape, one heading style, alt text, and wait, that's not a button moment at a time. She believes accessibility isn't just about compliance, it's about care, clarity, and community. Whether through content design, district-wide training, or thoughtful use of systematic HTML, she works to turn value into action and explore how AI might help democratize accessibility, one inclusive course at a time. When she's not weaving equity into online learning, you'll find her experimenting with ways to bake Nutella into everything or 3D printing. I'd love to hear more about that later. So just a few announcements for today's webinar. So during the webinar, we will be sharing a survey for your feedback. Please take a moment to fill it out. It is a very short survey, but it really helps the CVC to improve for future programming and webinars. So we really appreciate your time in completing it. And then lastly, @One provides badges for course completion, but we do not offer badges for attending webinars. However, if your institution does require proof of attendance, you can stay till the end of the webinar, complete the survey, and request a copy of your responses, and that can serve as proof of attendance. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it to you, Sasha. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anwar. I appreciate the introduction. Thank you, CVC OEI, for having me. I'm really pleased to be here. As Anwar said, today's title is You Say You're My Ally, but then you X Me. We'll go into details of that title in a second. Promised it wasn't ChatGPT generated. I came up with it, and I will explain the thought process behind it. Throughout the presentation, you're going to see a lot of kind of funny caricature that I utilize ChatGPT for. It. Some I will describe, some we will just pass. It will be too much just to kind of describe absolutely everything, but where I deem important that the imagery is conveying to the overall context, I will make sure to describe that. So I will omit my introduction since Anwar was so kind to introduce me. The only thing that I will add that gives me credibility to talk about accessibility and usability is that I hold a certificate that it's IAAP, which stands for International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And this is a CPAC, Certified Professional Accessibility Core Competencies, that provides the basic understanding of accessibility and practice of. And then I also completed assistive technology applications certificate and programs from CSUN, diving a little more and deeper into assistive technologies. My big focus is bridging the gap between accessibility and usability, and then overall promoting and advocating for inclusive design. Outcomes of today's sessions are to differentiate between accessibility compliance and inclusive usable design in the context of higher education. Also to evaluate course content and digital tools through the lens of both accessibility and user experience. And then to identify some practical steps that whether you're staff or faculty, you can utilize. And the big push is to democratize accessibility, which I will talk a little bit more as the presentation goes, so that we start shifting this mindset of thinking of accessibility as a compliance task, but rather making it a shared responsibility. So how I came up with the title, it wasn't just a sass, it was a story of every course that technically checks the box, but still leaves students or your users confused or excluded. This was a play on words of A11y, or liberally pronounced as ally, which stands for accessibility. A11y is numeronym, and that number 11 stands for 11 letters between the letters A and Y. So often when you hear ally in this setting, we are referring to digital accessibility. And then also UX, or as we pronounced it, UX me, as being dumped, but in this context of bad design. And we are going to be talking about usability as a component of user experience. User experience is broad, usability is part of it, but also visual design, emotional response to content, branding, tone, trust, expectations, and so on. So we will focus on accessibility versus usability. So in this session, we are going to discuss that relationship, but also relationship between humans and the content, and also between our intent and our experience. Question for audience, and please feel free to reply in the chat. Have you ever created something accessible, but you got flooded with confused questions? So you can tell us maybe how that looked like, or you designed something super fancy, sparkly, flashy, and you thought that this is it, but there was still confusion and questions about what you may have created or what your intent was. So I'll give you a couple seconds if you would like to participate and share your answers. And I'll give it a second, and then I'll start reading some questions or answers that are coming from the chat. Marianne, you're welcome. I'll try to explain any accessibility pun. I'm full of them throughout this presentation. Answer came, the more sparkly, the more issues I have. Thank you, Anwar, for that. Another answer came saying, because I made certain assumptions about where it was obvious to click to move on to the next item. Those assumptions were not that obvious to the students. Another answer came saying GIR flashing buttons. Another answer says, if I followed accessibility rules, I don't have questions. Oh, and Jane made correction. It's GIF or GIF, however you pronounce it, flashing buttons. And Marianne also said she agrees with an answer that our assumption is content creator often are not assumptions of users. So there is a very common disconnect between what we perceive perhaps accessible and usable versus what our users may be. So for example, you can add alt text, but the text can say photo 1. So is that going to be accessible and usable experience? That's what we're going to dissect. So that intent versus impact, just because we followed the steps, that doesn't mean that we created usable experiences. In this segment, we are going to cover accessibility doesn't equal usability. And on the right-hand side, you have an image of ally and UX character as imagined by ChatGPT fighting, and ally is saying, I'm right, and UX is saying, no, I'm right. Because often we have a clash of these sides where one side claims that it doesn't have to do the other side's job. So accessibility is about students being able to access the content. And usability is that they can do that without friction. So when it comes to usability, it focuses on learnability. How easy is it to learn? Efficiency. How fast can I complete the task? Memorability. If I return to this point later, am I able to just seamlessly continue? It also focuses on preventing errors, but also if errors happen, how fast can we recover? But then lastly, it's satisfaction. So how are we feeling utilizing this content that it's designed in accessible fashion? And I'll give you a quick example. If your student utilizes your Canvas course and they can find assignment, find the submission link, they know how to upload, they get a confirmation that they did it, the confetti falls on the Canvas page, they don't get lost, that's a good usability. So that is one of the examples when it comes to being mindful of both sides. In the next 3 slides, I'm going to showcase an examples that are technically accessible. So this is the first of 3. Let's say you have alt text present, and it's an image on the right, and it's characters that are fighting. It's an HTML character that it's a div, and it has a role of accordion. And then a button is wrestling that character saying, "Are ya tapping out yet?" And that Arya is spelled as Arya. It's a little HTML nerd humor that I like. So you have this image, but then your alt text says image. And you run a checker. Checker is not going to flag that image. It's just going to think, oh, there is an alt text there, so it should be fine. But what if you also listed this alt text as graphic1 and then you left the file name? That checker may or may not flag that as an error. So technically, you made it accessible because you slapped on some alt text, but is it usable to all students in an equitable fashion? Probably not, because there's a huge difference between what you would visually perceive in this image versus hearing screen reader read that as an image. The second example focuses on color use and using color as the only indicator to emphasize something. And the image is showing 2 buttons. Left one is a red incorrect button with X, and then the right one is a correct in green and the check mark. Both have letters spelled. If we only relied on using color to confirm something or deny something, we're using color as the only indicator to emphasize meaning. Users who may have color deficiencies or issues with perceiving the screen may not be able to differentiate that. So we need to add something else. And in this image, we have text, we have a symbol, we have a color. So that way users are able to perceive that icon in another fashion other than just the color. So in a lot of cases, you're going to see where we solely rely on color, and we would say most important text is in green. Green check mark means that you are correct. But what if users have a monochrome vision, cannot perceive color, or have different colors deficiencies? We are not able to do that. So we can still make things technically accessible because we can use the color, but we need to find a way on how to make it more than just quotations technically accessible. And then the last example here is headings or application of headings. When we skip the hierarchy, lots of checkers out there are not going to flag you that you perhaps missed the heading order. As long as that heading is there, it's going to perceive that you have that structure in place. Often you may have H4, heading 4 as the first one, and H1 is hiding somewhere down the line, but the checker is not going to flag that. So when we look at that from the accessibility perspective, did we apply headings? Yes, we did. So content is chunked, it's served in segments, there is a title / heading, but are these in order? Well, that's sort of questionable. So we can technically make the content accessible with having improper heading hierarchy. I want you to meet WCAG, WCAG. And I'll go with the illustration first. Illustration is WCAG character is this kind of like a blue blob with a sheriff hat lecturing a little kids, so to speak, which are ally and UX. So our friends, accessibility and usability. So WCAG or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, depending where you're from, you may pronounce it differently. This is a set of international standards that will help us make content more accessible and make content accessible to a wide range of disabilities. So this has been designed and developed by Wide Web Consortium, abbreviated as W3C. And we use POUR, P-O-U-R guidelines. And these will apply across any platform, whether you're designing in Canvas, in Blackboard, web content, SharePoint, structuring emails, pretty much anything. These guidelines will apply. And I'm only emphasizing this because I often hear from faculty, well, this only applies to Canvas. Or if they are designing an infographic, they will say, well, rules are different because this is a visual content and not text. These will apply absolutely the same across board. So if you haven't heard of a WCAG, WCAG, you can simply go to W3C's website and dive a little bit deeper. So think about building a ramp, but you have no signs. So course can technically pass these accessibility guidelines, but still confuse absolutely everyone. So we're going to briefly explain what these POUR guidelines are. P is for perceivable. This means that information must be presented in a way users can access it with their senses, whether they are visually perceiving it, hearing it being read with screen reader, feeling it, any type of other assistive devices. That's what P for perceivable is. O stands for operable. And this states that navigation and actions must be possible for everyone, whether user is using a mouse, a keyboard, switch device, voice commands, or any other assistive technologies. U stands for understandable. And this talks about content being clear and predictable. And users do not need some kind of decoder to figure out how to navigate your course page, or maybe your infographic, or the online content that you're designing. And the last one here is R for robust. And this one states that content should work with assistive technologies now, but also adapt to any future tech. On this slide, I just listed all of these guidelines for P for perceivable, O for operable, U for understandable, and R for robust. And I'm noticing now that the P for perceivable got swallowed somewhere on the page, so my apologies. I want to highlight why these guidelines matter for higher education. Our course content design is rooted in universal design for learning, or if it's not, it should be. That's always our starting point when it comes to designing content for all. Accessibility is not an afterthought or something on a side. It's something that should be proactively included. When it comes to application of POUR guidelines in higher education, first one is that it's rooted in equity. So we think about POUR as education for all, and that will translate into practical design. If content is missing one of these, let's say operable, it won't be accessible. So we can't have one without the other three. We can't have content that it's understandable, but yet it's not perceivable by assistive technologies. That might as well if the content doesn't exist. If you follow poor guidelines, you want to make sure that you are weaving that mindset through, as that will reduce your rework. So proactive attitude versus reactive attitude, fixing things when we need it or when we know that students are not able to access material. Following these guidelines will also protect institutions. So we got to mention compliance, ADA, Section 504, 508, Title II of ADA that it's coming due in April of next year. So it's about doing the right thing, but also using these measures to follow the guidelines and meet that compliance when it comes to law. And lastly, when we follow POUR, we are making our content future-proof. So we are ensuring that it's not only working with what we are presenting it with today, let's say Canvas, but if we're using the tools that are functioning within that ecosystem, that will translate with any future adaptations, any future evolvements, and so on. Screen readers, assistive technologies, you name it. Question for the audience: how do you practice POUR? And I will backtrack it to that slide where it has all of them listed so that you can use this as a reminder. So how do you practice POUR? If you can give us one maybe functional example from your content design, whether you are creating courses, infographics, internal communication, newsletters, how do you practice these guidelines?
Sasha, while people respond to that, there was a question.
Okay.
How do we faculty get on board with UDL and basic accessibility first?
Thank you for the question. By being curious, by attending sessions like these, by learning in chunks and scaffolding the knowledge, accessibility can be very overwhelming, especially if it's perceived as an add-on. My personal opinion is that instead of focusing on what we should do, we got to understand the why first, the impact of inaccessible content, the impact of someone not being able to successfully complete your course, the impact of having students feel different and like they don't belong in your online setting. So understanding the why and the impact of inaccessible content or content that it's not usable, that's how we get to understand what we should do and how we should do it. So I always lead with the why in any of the teachings, in any help that I provide faculty or working with students. It's making sure that everybody's on the same page of understanding that impact first, and then we can break it down and teach bits and pieces and chunks of how we should do it and what we should use to do it. I hope that helps a little bit. Okay, I'm going to read some answers from the chat on how do you practice poor. Steve said, I double check my lecture images for accurate image descriptions. Wonderful. Camille said, I check student view, especially checking all the links. Kari said, using heading levels in course pages, adding alt text to images, and also using pulp tech in Canvas. Wonderful. See, I said one thing that I have used is to actually touch base with my students who have specific needs and ask them how accessible things are. I found out that some of my discussion boards items were hard to navigate. Excellent point, TI. Marianne said, I close my eyes and ask myself, How would any person understand it? Have I described it in a way where it can be clear, kind, and understandable, even for translators? Wonderful. Alice added, I use every tool that is available when creating files or Canvas content. However, not completely confident that my content is completely accessible. Fair enough. And the last input was applying POUR by updating our training content and using accessibility checkers, as well as getting feedback from others for usability and clarity. Very good, Jennifer. Thank you. In the next segment, we're going to cover when UX, user experience, fails, accessibility fails with it, or falls with it, sorry. On the right-hand side is a depiction of these two, let's say, M&M characters named Ally and UX, and they're on a teeter-totter, and they're almost at the even position, but they're arguing, I'm higher. No, I'm higher, in a sense that one of them is more important to this context than the other. When we don't apply when we don't think about user experience, we can easily create a crisis, because this will have a real world consequences. It starts with confusion. It can lead to frustration, and the last, course, dropout. So when we simply design content by using accessibility checklist and then thinking about compliance, 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 but we don't actually think about the end user experience and their navigation and the overall learning environment, often this is what it leads to. By the time you learn that student has dropped the course, may be too late, because they may never come forward to say that they are confused or that they're frustrated or that they need you to fix the content for them. So the cost of that poor user experience is also higher in students who are using assistive technologies, but also those who may be learning with cognitive differences. On the screen is a student experience, first of two slides, and the quotes on the left say, I couldn't figure out how to submit my assignment, I just gave up. And then the second quote says, the instructions were long, dense, and buried in a wall of text. And what you see on the right-hand side is an image, a screenshot of Canvas page that it's loaded with text. So there are some chunks, but it's text upon text upon text and so on. So there's just so much going on here that while it may be designed with accessibility in mind, it is too much. So users will just simply give up. The second slide quote says, the contrast hurt my eyes, and I have no idea where to start. The image is showing a screenshot of Canvas content page designed with a lot of fluorescent colors, like neon green, neon yellow, maybe even orange. Often we may perceive that adding some fun can be done through colors, and it can. It just needs to be done in a fashion that will be perceivable to all. Not only that this is just a bad example for users who may have 20/20 vision, but also for those who may have cognitive disabilities, deficiencies with perception, color deficiencies, and also maybe even dyslexia. Screen readers on this end will not be impacted by the use of colors, because the screen reader will read the content for what it is created. But we may have users who still have some vision, but also rely on screen reader experience. So we need to think about that diverse pool of students. So this example is very bad because we approach this with the intent of having fun and creating this to be engaging through maybe use of color, but the impact is that this turned out actually being very poor user experience for most of the users. I have another question for the audience. What is one frustrating moment that you've had with accessibility and usability? And I will describe the images that are on the bottom. One is HTML getting in shape, thinking that you may need to improve your page, so you rely on HTML. Having POUR in a perfect sync, depicted here by harmonious yoga poses. And then maybe having a PDF being really proud that that PDF turned out well, but guess what? There are no tags that carried over. So what may have been one frustrating moment that you thought you did it all, but it didn't turn out well? And while you are listing your answers in the chat, there is always a hidden equity issue, and that is that students who have multiple barriers will suffer the most. As I mentioned, we may have users who are not perceiving everything visually and rely on screen reader. So if one doesn't work, we would hope that screen reader will pick it up, but with a bad design, there's no win for any of the parties. So that inconsistency in design, maybe inconsistency in interfaces, in navigation can definitely increase cognitive load. And simply last, what if what if we're just tired? We're distracted in a noisy environment. We have a limited Wi-Fi. That can also manifest in a very bad user experience, regardless that you applied all of your accessibility guidelines and thought about usability. So we need to think of those things as well. I will read some answers from the chat. And I think PDF wins because a lot of you said that PDF is one frustrating moment. Sarah said, while I'm no coder, I am adept at setting things up in a Word doc or something similar. Setting up what I'm looking for in a page continually gets me. PDFs could be abolished. Corey said, tabs, I'm assuming multi-tabs, Camille. Steve said, when I realized more than one of my PDFs was not OCR ready and the OCR app was not working on my PDFs. Oh, some strong feelings about PDFs. I hate PDFs. 100% export from HTML to PDFs. A Word document are much easier to fix than PDFs. Thank you, Magda. And somebody else said multi-tabs, yes. So there's a lot of different things that we may start with good intent, but we can get frustrated along the way, or maybe just because misplacement of guidelines, misinterpretation of guidelines, or we saw that somebody else did something cool and we want to repeat that experience, we may not think about the usability of it. And I'll give you an example since multi-tabs were mentioned in the chat. Often folks will say, well, multi-tabs are not accessible. No, they are accessible. They are not as usable because they will have one appearance on the web. They will be positioned horizontally, stacked left to right. Users can interact by selecting one next to each other. But if we open that same content in Canvas app or potentially smaller device, these will be stacked on top of each other. So that will, in return, create horizontal scrolling. Depending on the length of that content in those multi-tabs, that can be infinite scrolling. So we're not providing that equitable experience. So content is usable. Content is accessible, but content is not as usable for all parties in the same fashion. And thank you for bringing that answer up. So this was a perfect example for this slide. Okay. In the next segment, accessibility is everyone's job. On the right-hand side is the little, I'm just going to call it Eminem ally. Orange one on the stage shouting and holding ally flags, and the audience is cheering and everybody's holding ally, ally. And the little ally Eminem says, you can do it. So we're going to talk about how we can do accessibility as everyone's job. So Accessibility is not one person's responsibility. We often think, why should I fix it? We have accessibility specialists. Or why should I do it? We have DSPS. We need to think about accessibility as a culture shift, shared ownership, shared scalability, shared sustainability. As faculty, you can use accessible guidelines when creating content. And some of the examples are use heading styles. They will help everyone. Use clear instruction, which will turn into using clear and plain language. Label your links properly. Give them a descriptive meaning versus URL. As admins, fund captioning tools, fund training, fund education when it comes to accessibility and usability topics. We need you to be our ally. We need you to advocate for what we are expected to do. And then another example here is DSPS. They can provide support, but not fix everything post hoc, because by the time students goes to DSPS to actually ask for help, it's always after the fact, after the test has ended because students were not able to access it, or after you have asked students to submit an infographic and all your instructions was infographic that screen readers were not able to read. So we need to think about that everybody will benefit from accessible design, whether you are a laptop user, mobile user, you're non-native English speaker. I rely on closed captionings for 100% of everything. Like I can't watch anything without. I'm an ESL speaker. I grew up reading captioning. I read first, then listen second. So think about users who may need that type of accessibility guideline. Distracted parents, somebody who is nursing a baby but attending your course online. So we need to figure out how to normalize making accessibility checks as part of everyone's content development and review cycles. If you're faculty and you create content, maybe have another pair of eyes help you test that content. Maybe learn how to use screen readers, VoiceOver on Mac, NVDA on Windows. Yes, it's a steep learning curve, but it's going to go a long way in understanding how to improve your inclusive design. If you need to review items, you can use the help of a lot of browser extension, automated check tools for accessibility, but don't forget that you also need to do manual testing as well. So normalizing these parts of our content creation process is what's going to help accessibility be everybody's job. We need to shift the culture, as I mentioned, and we need to normalize question, is this accessible as, is this posted yet? And what I'm showing on the screen on the left-hand side is an image of a professor drinking coffee in front of the computer. On his laptop is a teeter-totter of a wheelchair person and a symbol for a person. He has a window looking at the beautiful sunshine outside, stack of papers and books around him. And on the wall, there is a framed text says, remediation, pass it to someone else, but then crossed with red lines. And then below, another frame says accessibility, let's reframe it. The piles are divided into not sure how to fix it, pass it to someone else, but also there's a little glimmer of hope because there is a stack of books behind saying, but what if I try? I learn, everybody learns, democratize accessibility, and when I learn, you learn. So thinking about that culture shift where we're all part of it. This segment is going to shine the light how we move from checklist to actually caring. And on the right-hand side is a depiction of Ally and UX characters talking. And Ally is looking in a mirror, or rather peeking through the mirror, saying, Ally is numero uno. This is supposed to be Schwarzenegger's reference. And then on the other side is a UX kind of looking puzzled, confused, holding an Ally checklist. So we often, in today's era, especially with the scare of Title II coming, think of accessibility as a checklist only, but accessibility is actually way more than that. The quote on the screen says, usability is not a luxury add-on, it's what turns access into actual learning. We think of accessibility as an add-on as well, but when we tackle accessibility, then we think of usability as an add-on. But if the content is not accessible, it will not be usable. Or if the content is not usable, it doesn't matter that it's accessible. So these two work cohesively to truly create that optimal learning environment. In order to build inclusively, I'm going to give you sort of a lineup of some strategies that you can use to start thinking of building with accessibility in mind versus doing that after the fact. Chunking content helps absolutely everyone, and it will allow users to reduce their cognitive overload or avoid it completely. Using clear labels. If you're building items that need to have clear, distinguished labels, think about that. Logical reading order, especially if you're creating presentations or editing the documents like PDFs, what you said in the chat. You want to ensure that the logical reading order for the visual user is what the screen reader will experience as well. You as a content creator has that autonomy to decide what's more important. Do users need to get the image first or alt text first and then the text, and vice versa? And this is a question I often get when folks say, should image be positioned left or right? Well, that depends on the order of your content. What should users hear or read first? Using descriptive links. Stop posting URLs. Stop using click here, learn more, let's get started. Those things don't help anyone, not even users who can visually perceive that link. Is that accessible? Yes, because it's not the live URL, but is it usable? No. Heading hierarchy. Headings help everyone. They provide an outline of the content for assistive technologies, and at the same time, visually they signify order or hierarchy of the content on the page for users who can visually perceive it. Accessible names. Users with assistive technologies will pull the accessible names and also navigate the content often. So making sure that whatever you're creating makes sense. An accessible name is usually that title of that element that it's going to be read by assistive technology for identification. Don't be afraid to use white spaces. White spaces can also help users distinguish segments of the content and give them rest when they're moving from section to section if they are reading the content. So white spaces can actually help with readability. Stop using color only for emphasis. We already discussed this in the previous slide. Don't be afraid to use color. Just know that you need to use color plus something else. Color plus bold text style, plus maybe italics, although sparingly with italics because of the slanted angle of the letters. It can impact users with dyslexia. You can use color plus a symbol, color plus identifier. There's so many ways that you can utilize color. So don't that be deterrent for you not to use color. Just know that it needs to be paired up with something. Next one is keyboard navigable. So you can always use the tab key and the arrow keys on your keyboard to try to navigate through the content to see is that experience the same, similar for the users who are also visually perceiving it. If you are keen or know how to use screen readers, that will be an ultimate best when it comes to testing content before you publish it. And the last one I have here is plain instructions. In some subjects, this is easier than the others, but try to be as explanatory as you can. If your content matter is difficult or complex, maybe think about embedding some vocabulary, thesaurus, anything that's going to help user break down that content. So that's what we are going to focus on in order to build inclusively. So When you're designing, think about designing for somebody who's either tired, they're on their phone, maybe they solely rely on voice dictation, or simply using some other assistive technologies. So diverse learners, diverse means of accessing that content. We want to design for all, because good design will help reduce stress and it will boost learners' confidence. Excuse me. 4 bullet points that I have on this slide say inclusive design help everyone, support diverse learners' needs, removes barriers, and then also allows independence. What I have as an example to support this is Ally versus Ally and UX. I know it's very small on your screen, but if you are using Zoom, you can utilize your Zoom window to magnify your screen if you want to see the differences between these two images. On the left-hand side is a previous example of that cupcake page that it's dense and loaded with text. It is accessible, it has headings, it has appropriately used lists. So the content is structured following accessibility guidelines. But is that the best user experience that we can provide? Maybe, maybe not. Lots of text without any break with imagery or any other add-on on the page can help, excuse me, increase cognitive overload. On the right-hand side is an example of the same page that has been done with thinking about that visual design, learning experience, streamlining the flow of navigation, readability. So we used a little bit of HTML here, or City Labs, if that's what your campus has, to add some decorative headings to section of portions of the content that we thought are important. Also thinking about that color contrast and not overusing color when it comes to that ratio between the color of the text and the background. We used headings to structure information in a meaningful fashion so that assistive technologies can access this information in a much easier way. So there is a lot of differences between when we're simply designing content in accessible fashion, just checking off boxes, headings, check, links, check, lists, check. But when we do that mindfully, thinking about user experience, and then weaving that accessibility proactively, everybody's going to benefit at the end. You want to think about small habits, and those small habits are going to turn into big shifts. The right-hand image shows that Ally and UX character with those hazmat hats are building a house together. So this just tells us that these two need to work together. Some of the key ideas is progress over perfection. I even have a t-shirt made out of with this saying, and in each O is an accessibility symbol. Progress over perfection means that accessibility grows through repetition, not perfection. So repetition, not perfection. And second idea here is that you want to focus on scaffolded learning. So pick one inclusive design habit, stick with it. Once you have become comfortable with it, add one more. So think about every time you add an image, pause, think about, does this need alt text? Yes or no before you move on. When you start copying and pasting content from elsewhere, pause. What about heading styles? Would the content inherit what I'm pasting, or do I need to check that? Yes, I need to check that. I may need to adjust it. Once you do, move on. What if you used text in color? Use a contrast checker. In Canvas, we have a Pope Tech, we have Uja. You can use multiple different browser extensions. Check that color contrast before you move on. So those are the habits that we need to start implementing in proactive fashion. Accessibility is not a feature, and the right-hand image has Ally and UX sitting at the table drinking coffee, and accessibility says, I am worth more. And this is based on that we always think accessibility is an add-on, it's a feature, it's something that I do at the end. This is so boring. Why do I have to do it? It's not part of my job. As long as we have that perception of accessibility, we'll never be able to demonstrate the strong why on how accessibility becomes proactively part of your content design journey. You don't have to be perfect, but you have to be intentional. So next time when you quote unquote feel forced that you have to change the heading or add alt text, think about that you're not just being compliant, but that you're actually someone's ally. Second to last slide here is says ally and UX. On the right hand side, these two characters are going kind of hand in hand, hugging. Ally is wearing a shirt that says ally plus UX, and UX character is wearing a shirt that says democratize accessibility. So when user experience fails, accessibility suffers, as you may have concluded through the slides of this presentation. But then when we really silo that accessibility and isolate it, everybody loses. That's why we need to think about democratizing it, making it everybody's job. So let's stop UXing or Xing our allies and start building content that it's worth trusting. So accessibility takes advocacy of every day, every hour, every opportunity we get, because after all, we're humans. We are on this journey. Accessibility is a journey. So share what you're doing, because it is important to normalize inclusive approach in everything that we do. And before we jump to QA, I just want to leave you with one more quote that says, accessibility isn't a feature, it is a foundation. And I want to thank you, everyone, for the work that you do, for the questions that you ask, for pointing out the work that needs to be done, and for not stopping advocacy, because the work is not done yet. Thank you all for patiently listening. I will resort to chat to see if there is anything that I may have missed or any questions that I didn't answer. And please feel free, if you don't have questions, maybe share one thing that stood out to you in this presentation, or something that was aha moment. Anything. I would appreciate to hear your experiences.
Tasha, while the questions come in, thank you so much for that amazing webinar. But while they're coming in, I'm just going to make some final announcements, and we'll, stick around if anyone has questions. Please do put them in the chat or in the Q&A option. So thank you everyone for attending this amazing webinar. Before you go, please make sure that you check the chat for the survey link and take a moment to complete it. You'll receive a copy of your responses, which can serve as verification for your attendance. And of course, if you encounter any issues, feel free to reach out to the team at support@cbc.edu. We encourage you to explore our other webinars that we'll be offering throughout the term. I will go ahead and drop the link for the future webinars that we have. Here's the link. And lastly, this webinar and its recording and associated slides will be available on the CBC at One webinar site, which is the page I just shared. Please allow a few days for captioning before they're posted. Thank you all so much. I see there's a few questions about the slides. Yes, they will be shared. And we can also drop the link right here. I think I have it. Yes, right here. So here's the link for the slides.
And please, if you find errors in a slide, we're not perfect. Just ping me and let me know that something needs adjusting and correcting. And I'm just checking if there's anything else in the chat. There was a question about the keyboard navigability, but I think that Miriam already posted a couple resources. Wonderful. People were commenting about loving the city labs. Excellent. Clear and structured, well-structured webinar. Thank you so much. I hope that this was helpful. Helpful to learn acronyms. Always. I'm glad that that was clarified. You're welcome, Alice. You're welcome. You're welcome. Audrey said, love that you presented both accessibility and usability together. So many, including my own workshops, only talk about one or the other. Well presented, and love the humor to go with it. Thank you, Audrey. I appreciate it. I actually wanted to go with a googly eyes reference to Christopher Walken on SNL, but I didn't know how that's going to land with everyone. So I had to opt for a different direction here. You're welcome. Can I add my contact information to the slides? Anwar, do I have a chance to add that into the slides or?
Yeah, if you just go into your slides, you can add it. And then,
Okay,
because I shared the link, so when you update
okay,
it, it will show up for everyone.
no problem. No problem. I will do that. Thank you so much.
You can just add a slide at the end if you want with your email. That'll be very helpful because I'm sure people have a lot of questions.
Okay, I will certainly do that. I don't think I have any other questions, Anwar,
No,
unless they came on your end.
no, I think that's it. Thank you all so much. And thank you again, Sasha. And thank you to our amazing interpreters. We really appreciate everyone being here. And I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.